Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, which will focus on local economic development. We will be presenting an overview of LAD that has been developed as part of a stock-taking exercise by the Employment and Income Network of SDC. And we will also hear from some real-world examples of LAD projects in SDC. My name is Marcus Jenal from Mesopartner. I am a member of the ENI Network's backstopping team, and I will be moderating this webinar. There is a renewed interest within SDC for approaches that focus on strengthening local and territorial economic processes, which is the reason why we developed the stock taking and having this webinar and the following e-discussion. The interest comes both from the ENI perspective, from the employment and income perspective, but also from the perspective of decentralization and local governance. This is why this webinar and the subsequent e-discussion are organized as a collaboration between the Employment and Income Network and the Democratization, Decentralization and Local Governance Network. As a reaction to the interest in LAD, the ENI network has done a stock taking on current understanding and trends in LAD, and also started to collect a list with projects which apply a territorial approach to their work in economic development, even if they might not call themselves LED, local economic development projects. During this event, we'll present our current conceptual understanding of LAD and how it fits with other approaches and concepts that are used in SDC. We will also present two cases of SDC-funded LED projects. The webinar is part of a broader e-consultation to gather feedback on the stock taking and hear from others that do LED. So we will follow this webinar with an e-discussion on the D-Groups platform. Now for this event, it's supposed to be interactive. Most of you have already found the chat box on the left and are introducing yourselves. This is great. You can also use the chat box to ask questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end where we'll pick out some of your questions and ask them to the presenters. And also, if you have some technical issues, please use the chat box, and somebody from our team will try to help you with your technical problems. The event is also being recorded, and it will be made available on the share web. Before we go into the content, though, and before I present the other presenters, I would like to know a bit more about you. And make this also more interactive. I will open a poll now on the screen. You will see a poll coming up shortly. I'll ask Maya to open the poll because I cannot do that currently. And we'll just essentially ask you where you are dialing in from, so we know a little bit where the people are sitting at the moment. There we go. So just please click on where you're dialing in from, and then we can see about what continents are represented here. Oops, now we lost the presentation. Just a second, I'll get it back. And then I will introduce. There we go. Very good. So let's go on. And let me introduce today's presenters. Tamuna Tsivtsivadze is head of the program in the Swiss Corporation Office in Tbilisi, Georgia. She is responsible for the domain of effective democratic institutions, human safety and security. And as part of that portfolio, she has supervised the design of a project that includes aspects of LED. In its second phase, the project is called Fostering Regional and Local Development in Georgia. And this comes in from a perspective of decentralization and local governance. Sohel Ali is the Senior Program Officer at the Swiss Cooperation Office in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and he's responsible for the domain of economic governance. He has had an interest in LED for many years, and last year SDC Bangladesh designed an LED project that is starting this year with an 18-month inception phase. So just to mention, both projects are new, both projects haven't started yet. Although Tamuna's project is going second phase, the LED component has not started yet. So they will talk about their experience in designing these projects. But first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about the conceptual understanding of LED. So what is LED? What is local economic development? Local economic development takes place in a defined territory. It is a participatory and inclusive process that involves a range of stakeholders. It is essentially a bottom-up process. It is about local people making decisions about local issues. It's very important, the participatory aspect of it. It is working towards economic competitiveness. If it is a project like SDC project, it takes a facilitative approach towards improving the economic competitiveness or economic situation of the territory. And it is undertaken for the purpose of fostering economic well-being within that defined territory. There are often other aims mentioned in connection with LED, such as, for example, inclusiveness and environmental sustainability. So not just purely economic competitiveness. There is also this term of territorial economic development, but TED, but this is not a firmly established concept. It's something that's sometimes differentiated from LED by being more process-driven, but in general it's not established. So it's quite difficult to see it as a separate concept. We just treat it as the same concept as LED. Why would we do LED? What is interesting about LED? LED happens at a very interesting scale within the defined territory, usually generally subnational territories, where priorities are set locally in a participatory way. Within a given territory, there's quite a good potential to create visible impact. Often working in rural areas or secondary cities, this also lowers the migration pressure to the bigger cities. And from a very pragmatic point of view, it provides clear boundaries for monitoring and evaluation of projects. Now, LED is an integrated approach. It integrates economic development and governance issues. It strengthens local governance. We'll come back to that. But it also brings in the private sector. In addition, it fosters inclusion of women and marginalized groups in these areas. Then, as a third reason for LED, for why LED, is that the place is relevant for development. There is no development that doesn't happen in a specific context. So the territorial context matters in any way, whether you use a territorial approach or not. But territories serve as an anchor for institutions. So institutions are locally based. So if we take a territorial approach, we can appreciate that. In a territory, different interventions from different projects come together in the same place and have an effect in that particular place, where a territorial approach helps to see the different influences of different projects. And the territorial approach also is relevant, or the localities are also relevant because we can establish links between dynamic urban areas and lagging rural areas and integrate those different types of contexts. Who are the key actors? The The key actors in LED are, as you can see here, government, the private sector, and civil society. So all three groups are important to be part of LED. The government is not only seen as a provider of services and regulations, but it can actually be a facilitator of the development process itself. So it can be the lead. It doesn't have to be, but it can be the lead of the development process in the locality. Local government, obviously local government institutions thereby play a central role, but there are also other layers of government that can be potential actors in LED. The private sector needs to be willing to contribute their part to the prosperity of the location, so they need to have a certain interest in the location as well. Now the engagement, and we know that the engagement of the civil society is obviously a part of any good governance process, also LED. It ensures that democratic principles are upheld in the process. Now the examples of government agencies that could be part of an LED process are elected and senior appointed public officials. It could be representatives of regional or local governments. It could be directors of major public utilities, for example, or representatives of local schools. So it's not just the mayor, for example, in a territory, but it could be diverse actors from government. Private sector can be business managers, SME owners, representatives of financial institutions, of local chambers, and so on. And in the civil society, it could be NGOs, media representatives of local religious communities, or of labor unions. What are features of LED process? LED is a continuous process. It's not a one-off thing. It's a common strategy for development and agenda setting within that territory, and it adapts to the local dynamics and to the market condition. LED is about building trust between stakeholders. It's about building connections. An interesting aspect of LED is that it connects fragmented policy approaches at the local level, such as local governance, enterprise promotion, investment promotion, agriculture development, skills development, technology extension. So these all come together and can be taken under one strategic approach under LED. So it brings them together and streamlines them as well. Also, it brings together different sectors. It brings together interventions across multiple value chains. And the funding happens from different sources, so it's not just public funding, it's not just private funding. It can also be part of it, can be mixed. In addition, as I mentioned already, LED can foster environmental sustainability, resilience, and inclusion in a particular area. What are the preconditions for LED? Even though it can start as an initiative from the public sector, or it can start driven by advanced private sector companies, in the end, there is a need for both sides to participate. And private actors here are also the civil society. So remember the three circles of participants. There needs to be a basic level of trust and the ability to collaborate and agree on things. If you don't have that within a community, it's very hard to establish an LED process. If there is no trust at all, no social capital, it is very difficult. You need a certain capacity to manage an LED process. This is often provided by the project, by the LED project, but in the end, as this is a continuous process and not a one-off intervention, this capacity should be established in the location. And you should also have a national LED policy to support the territorial processes, because otherwise it is difficult to motivate, for example, the local public officials to meaningfully engage in LED processes if they don't have the backing from the central government. And what are challenges or contentions or problems with LED? There is often too strong a focus on strategic planning in the public sector, where in the end everything needs to be put into a plan, or what can also happen, there is too much focus on the participation and bottom-up process, which never ends up being taken up in any plan. So this is kind of a tension that can happen. It's often hard to find the middle ground, not over-planning and allow for participation, but also certain things need to go into strategic plans of the local institutions in order to be really implemented. Now, there is a certain challenge to establish the evidence base for a facilitative and participatory approach. Are we sure, can we know what results can be generated through locally led participatory processes? We have faced this problem already in facilitative approaches like M4P, but it's been addressed, so there more and more evidence comes up. Often we have a problem with an overlap between, or the lack of an overlap between administrative areas and functional economic spaces. So where the economy happens might not be the same as where local coordination, administration happens. And also the LED process shouldn't be decoupled too much from the government service delivery at local level. It should be integrated in what is there already and what is going on. Now let me talk a little bit about how LED comes together with other approaches to economic development, or in general other approaches that are applied in territories within SDC, for example, market systems development. We know that both are a facilitation approach and both stress local ownership. Now market systems development looks beyond boundaries of a territorial unit and focuses more on the sectoral approach, whereas the LED anchors itself in the territory. So you can see that there is quite a bit of complementarity in each other. The one can potentially help the other in achieving its objectives. Now, vocational skills development, VSD, there are different types of VSD approaches. One is looking at the formal national skills development system, and there LED can help to anchor these national level systems in local realities. Now, when we talk about VSD in terms of strength and local employability in a specific area, LED can be an important component in order to make the businesses also the territory competitive, so the businesses can grow and actually create jobs, but also can become better to articulate what needs to have in terms of employment. So it's about creating local jobs, providing matching skills, and so on. LED and skills development initiatives obviously can then enhance each other. Local governance, now here we see in the two circles a big overlap. LED is essentially a part of local governance, and in a decentralized context, it is the responsibility of the local government to also provide local economic development strategies. Both depend on, but also build participatory capabilities. So in a way, LED projects can be seen as a subset of local government's project, if you want. Now, about engaging with the private sector, you would, in an LED process, obviously engage with the private sector because they need to be part of it. Here, it would not necessarily be the donor who would engage with the private sector, but rather the local governance actors. So you would have to, for example, have PPDPs, public-private development partnerships between donors and private firms. Although this, in an LED context, would probably be less the case. You'd rather have PPDPs between local governments and private firms. But the principles remain the same, and you can use these principles also to help local governments to set up PPDPs. Social entrepreneurship and LED. Now, social entrepreneurship usually addresses specific socioeconomic challenges and not necessarily have a territorial focus. But there can obviously be positive influences on a territory if you have a successful social enterprise that is based in a specific territory. So there can be, and the other way around, obviously LED can support the establishment of social enterprises and businesses if this is something that is promoted from the LED project. Now, we wanted to show you another poll to ask the participants to see how much experience we already have, and now to ask Maya to put up the poll for us. There we go. So we're just asking you to quickly tell us whether you've been already in touch, whether you've implemented already LED projects, or whether this is something new to you. You should also see now the results. So most of the people are still new to local economic governance, local economic development, but have experience in local governance. All right, great. So that is very interesting to see. I will now get the PowerPoint back up. And then we'll move on to Tamuna's presentation about her project in Georgia. Tamuna, are you ready? Please take over.
Yes. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much. I hope it is possible to hear me.
Yes, it's great.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marcus, for your very interesting introduction to LED as well as to general webinar. I would like to start by saying a couple of words as an introduction that we have been implementing fostering regional and local development project in Georgia since 2012. However, those days local economic development was not perceived as important, although we had certain components which we called, for example, small grants, where different initiatives coming from the local scenes were coming and were funded. However, LED has been more incorporated into our second phase, which we started last December. That's why we are not yet able and in a position to share with you some lessons learned, however, and we have more open questions, but that's why I would like to mostly focus on the rationale of incorporating LED in our project, what led us towards this decision, and how the whole design process went. But in order to be able to explain it more clearly, I thought it would be good if I talk a bit about the first phase of the project, as well as about the general background that surrounded the project. So the first phase, as I said already, started back in 2012, and those days the main aim was, of course, to promote decentralization, advance local and regional development, and strengthen capacities of national institutions or local, regional, and national levels. And below you see three outcomes, how we aimed at achieving it. And one was local economic development strategies, another was to introduce a nationwide mechanism how to strengthen capacities of regional and local authorities, and then the third one was to strengthen capacities of two main drivers in the government behind decentralization, and one was the Ministry of Regional Development and Infrastructure, another was the Parliamentary Committee of Regional Policy and Self-Government. But in order to understand better our overall aim those days, as well as our three outcomes, it's good to say that the government that came to power back those days in 2012 was very much aiming at decentralization to enhance inclusive local and regional development, as it was their pre-election promise. Then they also had, of course, the population support, and all of the goodwill was also enshrined in Georgian government's rapprochement towards the EU. So those days, the Minister of Regional Development and Infrastructure has been nominated as a ministry to lead the decentralization reform, of course, in cooperation with different ministries and the donor community. So how the ministry those days started its work was that they announced the basic principles of decentralization, which were increased engagement of citizens in decision-making that affect them, as well as strengthening of subnational institutions. Because after announcing the clear message, they got support for quite some donors, including SDC, and many more are still joining or expanding their funding. The overall context back in 2012 2012 in Georgia was that despite impressive growth and fast-paced reforms that took place a decade earlier and still continued, rural poverty and disparities still remained between rural and urban areas. Ordinary citizens were not really advocating for their own rights, and the capacities of local self-governance entities were also quite limited and low to exercise their functions. We could also observe certain shortcomings in terms of local and regional governance. This was lack of clarity regarding the division of competences between the central government and LSGs, which somehow still unfortunately continues. Inadequate fiscal decentralization, which again is the case now, limited capacities of local authorities regarding planning, budgeting and delivering services to their constituencies, top-down policy making, and once again limited participation of citizens in local and regional governance processes. So it was against this background that our first phase of the project was conceived, with an overall goal and 3 outcomes that you already had a chance to have a look. So under the first outcome of inclusive local development strategies, we mainly aimed at strengthening regional administrations and local authorities' capacities in strategic and participatory development planning, in creating linkages between regional development plans, municipal development plans, and respective municipal budgets and regional administration spending. We had a small grant scheme which was also funding local initiatives that have been identified jointly by the municipalities, the civil society groups, and citizens. We also were trying to adopt municipal program budgets in accordance with municipal development papers, and we also aimed at building capacity of National Association of Local Authorities, which was quite weak those days. Under the nationwide mechanism of capacity development of local and regional authorities, we aimed at introducing a national training system for municipal civil servants at the ministries, through the ministries, a special center for effective governance system and territorial arrangement reform. We aimed also at developing curricula that would correspond to the competency requirements of local officials, and of course strengthen the capacities of training providers and link them with municipalities. And the last but not least component was building capacities of 2 main governmental partners in the decentralization process. One was the mentioned Ministry of Regional Development and Infrastructure, and another was the Parliamentary Committee on Regional Policy and Self-Government. Here we aimed at establishing a framework for decentralization and for local and regional development, as well as amending and introducing legislation that would aim at improving regional development and local governance and building capacities of these two bodies. So what was possible to achieve was that we indeed revised the code of the local self-governance, which was quite important. There were a number of laws that had to be amended because of the revision of the code. There were laws on mountainous areas, development of mountainous areas being developed, and the corresponding action plan and strategy on how mountainous development strategy. There were different forms of citizen engagement, mainly 2 forms being introduced. Certain management competences have been given to the local entities, local municipalities, and they were allowed to retain locally collected income tax and property taxes. There were 9 regional development strategies and action plans developed with 43 midterm municipal development documents, and hopefully most of the municipal development documents were also considered budget-wise for the municipalities. There was a special regional development fund set up, which was with municipalities 5% contribution. It was funding different projects of regional and municipal priorities. More than 4,000 civil servants have been trained in project management, public procurement, spatial planning, and different 31 basically local initiatives have been funded with a small grants component. However, despite all these achievements, the decentralization context still continued and even now is dominated by inefficient policy framework, limited decentralization of competences and financial resources, insufficient proficiency of local authorities, and weak participatory culture, which is aggravated by sparse cooperation opportunities between public, private sector, NGOs, and civil society organizations. So as a result of this, again, quality and accessibility of essential public services still continues to differ in rural and urban areas across the regions and between mountainous and non-mountainous settlements. Higher unemployment rates, especially in urbanized regions, persisted. because there were not so many job opportunities. Economic growth, again, continues to be unevenly distributed throughout the country, and gender equalities and women's underrepresentation in municipalities was again an issue. So it was basically against this somewhat gloomy background that basic premises for local economic development came into fruition. The government very much demonstrated its political will and support towards decentralization orally on different occasions, and by developing two biggest strategic papers, which are quite explicit about lead, and one is called Strategic Vision of the Decentralization Strategy for 2018-2025. Right now we only have the draft strategic vision of this decentralization strategy, but it is in a way expanding and fine-tuned, so hopefully it will be approved by the end of the year, and it's also being developed within our project. And another big policy instrument which was talking about lead was Regional Development Program of Georgia 2018-2021. So as you can see in the circles, apart from government's political will and support, there were major policy papers that were mentioning lead. In addition to these two policy papers that I mentioned, there was also SME development strategy. And of course, there were also a number of key donors that very much promote and encourage government's decentralization efforts, and lead as it's one of its tools. This has been basically the premise also for us to see lead as one of the tools to implement and promote decentralization. Here you will see a bit like those components that very much mention local economic development in the two papers that I mentioned. So the Regional Development Program, as you can see, has three pillars, which is economic growth, sustainable development, social and territorial cohesion. And just to illustrate how far they go is that these are the cross-cutting themes, which include improvement of key infrastructure like transport, energy, potable water, environment, solid waste, broadband infrastructure, support to SMEs, growth-oriented sectors of economy and export promotion, then improvement of human capital in terms of basic education as well as higher education and vet services, promoting local development and support to specific areas based on their indigenous development. So this document basically focuses predominantly on rural areas as well as areas with high concentration of economic and social problems, and areas with strategic potential, for example, border areas. And border areas is also something that we are considering now in our second phase. If we go back to the decentralization strategy, which I mentioned is still not finalized, but is expected to be approved by the end of the year, it also has main components covering local economic development. So as you could see, it's municipal programs that will support employment, small businesses, farmers, cooperatives, and agriculture. And it's also municipalities having their own plans, medium and long term, to develop local economies, and also enjoying having investment profiles to attract investors. However, beyond that, according to the legislation, local self-governance entities can also exercise certain functions which have been embedded from the very beginning. These are introduction and cancellation of property tax and different taxes, especially gambling tax is of special importance. In Georgia's reality, regulation of street vendors, fairs, markets, exhibitions, giving permissions for construction, and management of municipality-owned resources, which is water, forests, and land. However, beyond these, municipalities also have their own competences in the economic field of employment, agriculture, tourism, investments, and innovation. However, it has been only the capital Tbilisi and the third city in size, Kutaisi, using these opportunities. Many municipalities do not enjoy having industrial parks, business incubators, which is not prohibited by the law. There are only a handful of examples of municipalities cooperating with the private sector, unfortunately. Even when they have economic development plans, they are somehow overshadowed by overall socio-economic development programs, and they're not that explicit, and private sector is usually not involved in their development. So this has been, in a way, some policy background. And so after reviewing different policy instruments, also trying to synergize our projects with the different donors projects, we have come to the decision to have, to in a way embed LED in our project. And the rationale for this was, as you can see in this particular slide that we considered it participatory, inclusive and bottom-up, which is very important in Georgia's reality, where citizens' participation and initiatives from local municipalities are very limited and scarce. We saw it as an opportunity to foster well-being, against unemployment, uneven economic growth, as well as to support economic competitiveness between different municipalities and across the borders. And this very much resonates with the government's policies. We also saw it as a way to strengthen local governance and increase their credibility vis-à-vis the constituencies, so that we generate more active participation of citizens and civil society groups, increase populations and private sector's activeness, and facilitate their cooperation. And of course, it has a unique potential to build capacities and unite of local stakeholders and unite them around a common cause that is very close to them. So thus the second phase has been conceived, where we aim at stronger local government institutions for better economic development and employment generation, which is quite explicit and easily understandable for many in Georgia. You see that we aim at having three outcomes, and one is policy and institutional framework, which was mentioned that is still inefficient. We have been successful in the first phase, however, there is still a lot to be done, and that's why we kept this outcome. But here we intend to implement, in a way, LED-related aspects from the decentralization strategy, as well as from the mountainous development strategy and action plan that has been approved. We also aim at facilitating national and local authorities' capacities to facilitate LED in terms of trainings, and also incorporating LED into curricula of the national training system. And we also see the National Association of Local Authorities as a conduit, in a way, to prepare a package of policy initiatives that will enhance LED enabling environment in general. Under the second outcome, we aim at municipalities, partner municipalities, having municipal profiles and municipal focal points for LED to attract investors and entrepreneurs, to pilot LED initiatives between municipalities and private sector, especially in tourism, agriculture, and trade facilitation, because these are seen to be most instrumental. We also aim at cross-border facilitation. This would be mostly happening on the border between Armenia and Georgia. And we also aim at constructing two community centers, which are basically one-stop shop services created in the village settlements, and they offer different state programs and state services and information about them, as well as the services themselves, and businesses can go and get registered there. So in a way, this will also facilitate those entrepreneurs or local businesses that want to start some activities locally. And again, a very important outcome is the empowering and building capacity of civil society organizations and local businesses in LED planning and decision making. And here we will keep the small grant scheme, which has been very successful in the first phase. And we hope that by funding different initiatives, we will also, in a way, not only ensure that different local stakeholders are part of the decisions, but that the most priority projects are being selected, and they will learn also by doing, in a way. So these are quite ambitious plans, but we are just in the stage of starting our project, as I already mentioned in the beginning, and we hope very much that certain lessons learned that we had in the first phase, as well as the lessons learned from other donors, will be very much guiding us in our activity. The project is very much in line with our cooperation strategy for the South Caucasus, as well as with the different policy papers that the country has now, and part of EU-Georgia Association Agreement as well. So I guess I will stop here. And
thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much,
Thank
Tamuna.
you.
This is a really interesting project to see how LED can be approached from a democratization, local governance, decentralization, local governance perspective. And I want now to hand over to Sohel to talk a little bit about his LED project in Bangladesh that comes in from the employment and income perspective. So Sohel, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. And it is a good morning also for those who are listening from South Asia. Actually, we have been thinking local economic development since long, and why actually we thought, particularly in Bangladesh in last 10 years, the SDC Bangladesh took number of initiatives and designed number of projects in order to strengthen local governance institutions in Bangladesh, particularly working with different tiers of local government to develop their capacities to introduce local participatory planning and budgeting, at the same time establishing transparency and accountability in different local governance processes. Projects also are working to establish interface between local government institutions and also with the citizens. At the same time, SDC Bangladesh also took initiatives and designed number of projects in the line of market development, where number of projects actually working on certain value chain development. At the same time, they are implementing project following to the M4P concept. So far, we think that the overall context has been developed, which we used to consider as a precondition of local economic development. So what we did actually when we started thinking local economic development, actually first thing is with that we thought that we need to define LED particularly for Bangladesh. Why? When we look at all this conceptual framework, toolkit and understanding, we find out that some of them are not relevant for Bangladesh context. If we see the Bangladesh context, actually it is very centralized country in terms of its geographic characteristic, at the same time in terms of how decisions are taken at the central level, how entire governance is being managed from the central level. So one hand we have a strong bureaucracy here, which we actually gained from British colony. At the same time, actually, we see there are huge development by the NGOs, by the civil societies. And particularly, though it's a very centralized country, it's very difficult to work on the economic issues within the territorial approach. And then actually we started doing analysis how we could bring this local economic development concept through our two different aspects of market development and local governance. As a result, actually, we thought after long discussions and long analysis, our local economic development project should be based on economic space rather administrative space, because some of the value chains, some of the sectors also started from the rural areas and it crossed a number of districts also. Then we thought that it should be bottom up, but we should at the same time work at the national level to have enabling environment support from the national level, and we decided in our designing of the project it should be participatory and multi-stakeholder process. And then we did number of analyses, and we did contextual analysis. We did institutional capacity assessment also. How should be the LED model from Bangladesh? Whether it should be local government led, whether it should be private sector led. Then actually we realized that for Bangladeshi context, it would be good if we have a bottom-up public-private collaboration. As I mentioned, that Bangladesh is highly centralized country where policies, rules and regulations are being formulated at the national level, and then it actually goes to the local level for implementation. That's why we thought that we could have a mixed approach where we decided to work at the same time two institutional entry point at local level and national level. At the local level, we thought our LED project will be anchored within a municipality, and through leadership of the municipality, it will establish a multi-stakeholder participatory process of planning, strategizing, and development of local economy. At the same time, the inter-economic process, planning, designing, and piloting needs national support, needs enabling environment from the national level. Thus, we decided actually to anchor the LED with one of the ministry within the government of Bangladesh. And we did institutional analysis of number of ministries, and finally we came up with a solution that it should be anchored with the Ministry of Finance. The reason is that the scope of work actually match with their ministerial mandate. At the same time, Ministry of Finance is a neutral ministry and mandated to coordinate with other ministerial agencies and departments. As Marcus mentioned in his presentation also, our LED encompasses facilitation towards better performing, more competitive and inclusive local economy. One of the reasons we identified when we did the local context assessment, what is this income inequality in Bangladesh is growing. Income inequality among the people, income equality among the region also becoming a growing concern. Marcus also mentioned that we also thought that our LED should be undertaken for the purpose of fostering economic well-being of the people, including poor, disadvantaged, and women. And that's why when we selected the piloted districts, we plan to test LED approach, concept, and model in two districts actually. When we selected the districts, one of the strong criteria was in the selection process that how we could bring the results of LED to the local population, particularly the poor, disadvantaged, and women. As design process, actually, we planned that in Bangladesh, LED is totally new, so it needs time to evolve. At the same time, the LED skills and knowledge building also needs times, so that we plan the project will facilitate to develop the LED skills and knowledge among the local and national stakeholders, and then this knowledge and experience will be gradually translated and transferred. In the design, actually, we took two pathways. One pathway is that to test and establish LED at the local level, which include a contextualization of LED toolkit, refine and further develop the LED concept. At the same time, to develop a resource pool on LED at the local level. At the same time, actually, we thought to start dialogue and advocacy at the national level for longer term LED. Why actually LED for Bangladesh? Actually, as I mentioned earlier, from the SDC perspective, why we started thinking about LED for Bangladesh. If we look at the country development, we also see the importance of having LED program in Bangladesh. If we see the relevance of the program, As I mentioned that in Bangladesh, income and gender inequalities and different form of human deprivation we see based on the territory. So we see there are a number of reasons which develop so fast, and at the same time in Bangladesh more than 50% divisions are still considered the lagging behind reason. We see there are a lot of interventions from the donors, from the NGOs, and from the civil societies actually taken, which develop a conducive environment for LED. From SDC perspective, as I mentioned, that there are a number of projects under our income and economic governance domain, under our democratic governance domain, are working at the field level. Thus, we thought that actually it would be good to have a process-oriented project which will link different fragmented interventions under the project at the local level. And then the last point of relevance, actually, we think the linking dynamic among urban, peri-urban, and lagging rural areas. The LED, actually, we are thinking about it. It is an integrated project. It integrates with economic development, with strengthened local governance issues. It will be related with the generation of the revenue of municipality, quality improvement of the public services, which include municipalities and other public agencies. It will address the subsidiarity issues also when we develop economic plan and other strategies to develop local economy. It will bring private sector and civil society on board from the very beginning when we started thinking, when we selecting the local priorities for economic development. As we thought that it will foster inclusion of women and marginalized group into defined processes. We also see that if our pilot be successful, actually in that case we see there is a huge potential for interesting scale up among different regions, actually, as it has a nature of multi-stakeholder public-private collaboration. It is opportunity driven, so at the local level it will be bank on the economic opportunity and it will use this economic opportunity for further development, and it will also have an impact on income inequality, particularly by inclusive job opportunity and market access. Now I would like to talk about the theory of change we developed for our LED project. Actually, the long-term goal we have that the economically active people, including poor and marginalized women and men, have better business and employment opportunity and earn higher income. Currently, actually, we plan for a 18-month inception phase where actually we designed 4 intervention area. The one intervention area is that the building LED capabilities. Second intervention area is piloting LED process at the local level. Third intervention area is policy advocacy on LED. And fourth intervention area is curating LED knowledge, experience, and expertise. And both all these 4 pillars actually will contribute to achieve better performing economies, more competitive and more inclusive economy.
Sohel, I'm really, really sorry. I just wanted to let you know there is 5 minutes left till the top of the hour, so if you could try to wrap up maybe a bit earlier, that would be great. Okay. Sorry for that.
Okay. So the key element actually we think that as we already mentioned, the building capability, piloting LED process, policy advocacy, and curation of that. At the same time, we think about the risks, Particularly risks, we identified that the political pressure, particularly when we prioritize the issues. In Bangladesh, there is a confrontational politics which will create problem for institutional relationship and collaboration. At the same time, the politicization of institution and basic services also is challenged, but we did that analysis and we developed the measures to overcome it. The key actors in Bangladesh, actually local level, there are a number of line agencies and local government institutions will work. At the national level, we work with both private and the government sectors, particularly with different ministries and departments. Civil society will work with NGOs, particularly the development project, the local governance and market development projects, research institutions, medias. At the private sector, the project will work with different companies, private sectors, business, trade, and business chambers. The lesson learned so far, actually, as I mentioned, the first lesson actually that the Bangladesh is a centralized country, thus it is more relevant to focus on economic space rather than administrative territories. It needs to work on local and national level simultaneously because it needs one hand to develop something from the bottom. At the same time, it needs policy guidance from the national level. We learned that the choice of entry sector and anchoring institution also a challenge because there are a number of criteria we have to match. We have to look at the economic potential, pro-poor potential. At the same time, we have to look at the national and local government priorities also. Thus, we actually realized that project needs an inception phase, particularly to contextualize the LED concept toolkit and overall LED strategy. Another challenge we face in the beginning that building buy-in and identifying the champions. So that in the inception phase, we have to create LED knowledge and understanding, though it's new to Bangladesh bureaucracy, though it's new to Bangladeshi development actors also who will be involved with the LED. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Sohel. That was amazing. So there is a lot of thinking already going on around LED, and I'm aware that we are almost at the top of the hour. I would still like to have a very short Q&A. There have been a couple of questions for Tamuna, and are questions coming in for Sohel. So I am going to use a little bit more time. Obviously, people who need to leave, thank you very much for joining. There will be a webinar talking in French about Western Africa at 2 p.m. Swiss time today, and one talking about Honduras and the region in Spanish at 4 p.m. Swiss time. If you want to join those webinars, you're more than welcome. Maya will show a quick evaluation poll. Please, before you leave, could you click on one of those buttons there? But I would like now, so for the ones who can stay for maybe a little bit longer, to ask Tamuna, you have seen there's a couple of questions in the chat box. For example, one question that I find interesting, and maybe you could look at this a little bit, about the danger of crowding out other services when we focus the projects, or when you now focus the project on particularly economic, local economic development.
Right. Actually, as you know, before starting any phase, we always have risk assessments, and we always try to study as many options that could be possible due to our new intervention that could go wrong, as well as could enhance the certain activities that we've been doing so far. And the fact that the focus on economic development could crowd out other essential public services have not been really something that we saw, because again, it's local economic development. It's very much based on those localities, on those municipalities where we will be working. So the scope and the dimension of those interventions that we will be doing will be very much punctual, and it will not be spreading obviously throughout the country. And again, we do not aim at replacing any of the public services. On the contrary, we aim at strengthening and further building capacities of local municipalities in a way so that they could deliver better public services in a more efficient way to the citizens. So we do not really see the overlap of local economic development, which we hope will be public-private partnerships, again, between the public, like local authorities, as well as the private sector, civil society groups and citizens and the municipalities, and maybe private sector will be joining. So in a way, we do not see that they could cross the path with public services, because public services are things that the municipalities either inherent or exclusive rights that they do. And we do not really see that danger. But again, we are at the very beginning of the project, so we will be keeping an eye on that. And thanks a lot for this question.
Maybe Tamuna, just to add another one from Peter. Can you expand a little bit on how concretely to involve the private sector? Especially because this is one project that comes more from the local governance perspective.
Yeah. Once again, at this stage, what is possible to talk about is what we aim at, because we do not have yet concrete examples to share with you. But one of the ways how we aim to involve private sector is that we want the municipalities to have municipal profiles that will be containing information about general statistics about municipality, available services, resources, their economic potential, which municipalities do not have yet. And we also hope that there will be persons, and there are already persons basically trained by EU, and they are called lead focal points, the ones that will be aware of these municipal profiles and will be very much advocating for their own municipalities vis-a-vis the private sector. So this is how we see one of the ways how private sector could get involved, by municipal profiles and by competent people at the municipalities who will know what the municipality can offer to the private sector. Then we also hope that through the small grant scheme that we will be announcing within our project, private sector would be able to join, participate in the call for proposals, and hopefully they will be funded with once they have good projects that are priority for the local population. And this could be tripartite, even projects that could take place between the municipality, private sector, and civil society groups. With regard to cross-border cooperation, for example, we plan to have led forums between Georgia and Armenia, and we hope that there will be a number of joint activities that will come out as a result of forums that will be implemented, maybe funded by the private sector. So these are like very initial thoughts, and then we will know more after the project starts.
Great, thank you, Tamuna. Maybe a last question for you.
Numbers, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
From Thierry. Yeah. But who is leading the implementation at the local level?
I mean, our overall implementing partner is UNDP, but the project is it's a national execution, so it means that the Ministry of Regional Development and Infrastructure, which is the lead central agency responsible for decentralization, is the one overall responsible for the project. However, on the local level, it's of course the municipalities, and it's also the National Association of Local Authorities, which is in a way assembly of local municipalities that exist in Georgia, and they should be aware of all the concerns and gaps and needs of municipalities, and they should be advocating on behalf of them. So we continue now building capacity of this National Association of Local Authorities. We hope that with our help they will be able to come up with a package of policy initiatives to improve the lead enabling environment. So it's in a way a common endeavor between this NALAC, National Association of Local Authorities, and those local municipalities, 23 in total, where we will be working.
Thank you very much, Tamuna. So Sohel, got a question for you here from Andrea. She says, I think I do not understand why the centralization of a country would lead to a focus on economic and not administrative space, particularly if we are not looking at specific large-scale investments, but locally embedded development.
Actually, it has two perspectives. If we see this problem from two angles, the first is from the governance angle. Due to a heavy centralized country, actually decentralization process always affects by the strong bureaucracy and bureaucratic process, so that the weak local government institutions, at the same time we see there are a number of conflict of interest areas among the local government institutions. From this perspective, if we want to work a collaborative approach among 2, 3, or 4 municipalities together to come up a one regional plan, so it is a challenge for them. At the same time, when I see from the market perspective also, though everything is very centralized, it becomes difficult to develop a territorial economic approach, as the market also is very centralized at the local context. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohel. There is another question from Nurun to you. How far can we make balance between the private sector and government initiatives for resource mobilization?
Actually, one of the strategies we took, and we'll test it during our inception phase, that strategy is, as you mentioned, the PPDP. Through project facilitation, we try to build public-private partnership at the local level. It means that the municipality will have a partnership with particular private sector company or organizations actually to pilot some of the LED model. And then it will, through a process actually, it will mobilize resources from public and private sector.
Thank you, Sohel. One very last question from Thierry, which was more general, not necessarily for Sohel, but I'm giving it to you now. How far can the chambers of commerce play a leading role in LED? What are your experiences in Bangladesh, Sohel?
Actually, when we started thinking about LED, as I earlier mentioned, that we thought different model also. One of the model actually, we thought the Chamber of Commerce led LED in Bangladesh. And then we did the institutional assessment of the Chamber of Commerce, and we find that there is a lack of resources, lack of human capacity. At the same time, most of the priority of activities of the Chamber of Commerce is to do lobby and advocacy with the government to have much more profit, to ensure much more profit through tax waivers and other issues, rather than taking development as a mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sohel. And thank you very much, Tamuna, and thank you very much to all the participants. Thank you very much for your active participation in the chat box and your questions. Maya will show the poll again in case you haven't been able to vote yet. We will continue with the discussion. We're not finishing here. There will be an e-discussion on D groups. I assume all of you are already a member of the D groups. If you're not, then please let us know. We can add you. You will receive our first email with the initial questions very soon, probably tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to having a very lively discussion. As I mentioned, there are 2 more webinars today. If you want to join them, you're more than happy. You can use the same link that you used to join this webinar. So from my side, there is I'm only can wish you a good rest of the day, depending on how much day you have left. And looking forward to your active participations in the e-discussion in the D group starting tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining.